Hello, my name is Chris. I'm the head of GamesIndustry.biz, and welcome to part 2 in our special series of GI Academy videos, which is all around finding work, where we are covering job applications, CVs, interviews, salary negotiations, and all those important topics. This series is in reaction to the current situation in the games business right now, where tens of thousands of games employees have been made redundant as a result of overspending by games companies. We're not going to go too much into the causes actually of what's going on. If you do want to follow what is happening in the games business, do get the GI newsletter. It comes out daily. It covers all the big issues in the business. It is free. We don't charge anything for it. There's barely any advertising in it either. You're not being bombarded with stuff. Just head to the GamesIndustry.biz website, click on the newsletter. It's in the top part of the bar, and put in your email and you'll receive it. It's really useful. Our second video today is going to cover job interviews, which is a big part of securing that job. It can be overwhelming and scary, I know, and to give some expert advice in this, may I welcome back Alan Dixon, Principal Consultant at recruitment specialist Amiqus. Hello Alan, welcome back.
Hi Chris, yeah, good to be back.
I've obviously got a tiny bit of experience with interviews, normally people who apply for jobs at GamesIndustry.biz,
Yeah.
but nothing like you. So please take it away. Where should people sort of, I guess, before the interview, what should people be thinking about? What should they do?
So, prep is the answer. But I just want to acknowledge that interviews is often people's worst aspect of job hunting. It's the most time when you feel the most anxious. It's when it becomes really real. You have to take time out. You have to prepare, and a lot of people feel they go into an interview and they feel sort of anxious to impress. And I think that weighs heavily on you when you've been made redundant. And I think that's added psyche can actually damage your chances of doing a successful interview. So how to alleviate that sort of that concern, that anxiousness, I suppose, is preparing for an interview. That's probably the most valuable thing you can do. You can't, once you're in the interview, it's a bit like a runaway train. You can't always control what they're going to ask you. You can prepare your own answers, but sometimes the spirit of the interview takes you in a different direction. So the thing that you can control is the preparation that you do beforehand. So just some simple things, really. First off, play the games. If you can play the games, great. If you can't, look at reviews on YouTube. Make sure you see some video of gameplay, or try and borrow it from someone, play on someone else's machine. You don't have to speedrun it, just get a feel for it, just so you can at least say you played it and form a bit of an idea of it. You're in games, you should have an opinion. Likewise, if it's maybe a marketing role or something a bit more specific, if it's audio, maybe try and have your ear out or your eye out for anything that pertains to your discipline when you're looking at the game or when you're looking at the studio website. So look at the studio website, look at their social media channels again, look at the games previously, and again, really try and play or at least see the games. There's obviously a huge amount of remote interviews, so video calls, phone call interviews, and then there's obviously in-person interviews as well. So just on in-person interviews, make sure you know where it is, make sure you know your journey to get there, make sure you know the practicalities of actually attending the interview. If it's trains, give yourself a lot of time. The state of the UK train travel at the moment is absolutely terrible. And try, before you go, ask the people that have set it up for you, whether it's a third-party recruiter or whether it's an internal recruiter or the hiring manager. Ask them a bit about the interview. Is there anything that I can prepare for? Should I bring anything to help you make a decision? Can you let me know what to expect? These kind of open questions, interviewers don't always think to give this sort of information. So before you go, it's in terms of practical sense, it's about knowing where you're going and being able to get there, knowing what you should expect when you get in the interview. And I think anyone that's neurodiverse, especially, don't be afraid of asking for what you need to be successful. So, give you a great example. We had a candidate that was on the ASD spectrum, and they struggled with filling sort of silence when they were thinking about a question, and they really wanted to think thoroughly about answering that question. And they also struggled to sort of maintain eye contact, especially even on video calls. So we just told the interviewer about this and said, just so you know, candidate X, this is their situation, this is why, and to allow that, we just want you to let you know in advance of that, so you can give them that breathing space. Everyone knows where they stand. They're not anxious about it. It doesn't create a bit of an awkward scene during the interview. So it then turns a mountain into a molehill. And likewise, don't be afraid of asking, can you give me an example of any questions that you might ask me? Is there anything specific you want to know? Asking that information ahead of time, there's not a problem with that. If they're not able to give you they're not going to give you a list of every question they're going to ask. But they might be able to give you some general topics and general themes about your discipline or about your work role specifically. But I think, so that's some practical sort of, tangible advice. But I think the biggest stopper for a lot of people doing well in interviews is confidence. And I want to say this about interviews is that this is not an adversarial conversation. It shouldn't be. If it is, you don't want to work for them. A good interviewer will not make you feel like you have to jump through hoops and impress them to get this job. They're not holding it back and saying, I'm going to gatekeep this opportunity to you. A good interviewer should want you to do well in this interview. They've got needs that need filling with your skill set. This is a transactional agreement. You are giving your skills and your time for them to be able to meet your collective objectives. So you shouldn't go into interview thinking that this person is really above you, or that you should look up to them, or you should be in awe of them, or in any way, anything like that. This is an eye-level, non-adversarial conversation. And most often, these conversations are with people that will eventually manage you. So think back to your previous managers. Think back to the good relationships you've had with them. Think back to the good relationships you've had with senior people, with hiring managers in games. That is the kind of relationship you can and will have with this person that you're meeting. So go into that interview with confidence. It's really difficult when someone really talented and really skilled has this lack of confidence, and you feel it feels like an easy fix because the interviewer wants this person to be confident. They want them to do well. So that's easy for me to say. I do interviews for a living. So what are some practical steps to do that? So I'll give you an example with getting there beforehand. If I have to be somewhere on time, I think on time is late. I think 10 minutes early is on time. So if I have an interview, to make me sort of my anxiety go down, I will get there, I will know where I park, I'll have researched it on Google Maps. Likewise with a video call, and I know I told you about this before, Chris. So with a video call, make sure that your background is cleansed of anything. Make sure you're happy with your environment. Everything's fully charged. It's quiet. And when I say cleanse, that sort of admin around your environment, make sure that you're able to do the interview. That will stop any sort of interview nerves. Do whatever you need to do to go into that interview with a really confident mindset of I've got this, I can do this. You know that you're relevant for this job. You've made a relevant application. They see something in you that they want. So have that confidence in you. To do that, I did a video call to a whole studio who were being made redundant. I was giving them this kind of talk, and before I did the call, half an hour beforehand, went and grabbed a coffee, made sure I had my background was okay, made sure everything was charged up, and I was happy with the lighting and what I was wearing. But I also went and combed my hair and I sprayed aftershave. And my wife was like, "Oh, are you going out somewhere?" Yeah, are you going out somewhere? I was like, "No, I've just got a call, and I just want to get ready for it." She's like, "Oh, they can't smell you, And I was like, "I know, but it just makes me feel confident about myself, and it's just something that I do." And I did it for this, because I wanted to put my best foot forward. So whatever your aftershave is, find out what that is. Now, Chris, I know that you have a very unique way of sort of getting rid of your nerves right beforehand, and it's not always easy to do. But what is your tip, Chris?
So I do a lot of public speaking, and sometimes I've got used to it a bit more now. But even I was on Sunday Brunch TV before, and it was really nerve-wracking. And just before I had to go on, I went to the toilets and I went to the loo, and then I just sort of started. I couldn't shout too loud, but I basically acted. I went a bit crazy. I was going, in the room, really. And it was because I had so much nervous energy and I wanted to burn that off, right? And I wanted to burn it off. And, it's good to be a little nervous, to be clear. Like, it's not good to be too nervous. And I went in, and I marched straight back into the green room, and then I was marched straight into the studio, and I'd almost had no time for those nerves to come back. I had prepared. I'd got my list of questions in advance, like you said. I knew what I had to talk about. I knew what I was doing. I knew they wanted me to succeed. They want me to sound good on their show. They want their show to be good, and I'd also, I never got to the point where I was too clammed up or my mouth had gone too dry and stuff like that. So that's sort of my sort of tip there.
Yeah, and that's it. Whatever it may be, whether it's just a bit of grooming beforehand, or a special drink, or just having a bit of a walk, or watching a bit of your clip of your favorite show, just try and be mindful of the fact that you're going into this interview, but your skills are in need. They've got something that you want, and likewise, they have something that you want as well. So try and take that. Try and build up that confidence, and if you're really struggling with it, you've possibly been made redundant, you've possibly been rejected from other jobs. That unfortunately is the case for a lot of people. Try and put that to one mind. Try and be present in this moment, in this time. Those rejections, the fact that you've been redundant, don't matter. What matters is you're there at that interview and they want to speak to you. So yeah, do that and try and figure out whatever it is for you that makes you give that pep in your step. And I would say the biggest thing I see with remote interviews, video calls, is that people do them seamlessly back up against work. So they'll be at the computer and then all of a sudden they'll just go, and I'm in an interview. Take time away from your desk, especially with video calls, to do something else and then come back for the interview as if that room is now your interview, your studio that you're interviewing with. And I think it's really important to separate the two, give your mind a bit of a break. Look at the website, look at the games, and I think try and ascertain as much information about them as possible. Look at LinkedIn, look at the people that are interviewing you, and look at the job spec again. Remind yourself, why did you apply for this job? And if it is just because you need money, that's fine. But why are you relevant for this job? And more importantly, have a look at it as if the job spec and your CV back next to each other, as if you were the interviewer. What gaps do you notice? What have you got a bit of experience that's lacking? Have you shipped loads on certain platforms but not PC? That might come up in interview. So have a look at it from an interviewer's perspective as well. Think what might they say, what might they not be so keen on in my experience, and try and think of ways that you can overcome that. So if it is a technology or an art platform or tool that you've not used, you can say to them, I'm aware that I've not used Maya, but I've noticed that there's a really good tutorial on YouTube. I've got a friend that uses it. I've managed to get a demo license. I've been able to create something here. So try and think ahead to anything that you think might trip you up in the interview, and try and prepare an answer, like a soundbite for that. Preparing for their questions is one thing. They are going to ask you about challenges you faced, anything that you're particularly proud of. They're going to ask you things like, how have you resolved things like conflict? How have you worked as a team? How have you met a deadline that was particularly tough? Questions like, what are you most proud of? So they're not all the questions they're going to ask you, obviously, but be prepared to talk about those broad subjects. Think of a couple of achievements or a couple of situations you've been in that you're proud of, that you can talk about. Be prepared to talk about your portfolio, and be prepared to talk about the work that you've done. So just remind yourself about those three areas of your work. So your physical work, your portfolio, and then anything you're proud of, how you've worked as a team, how you've worked to deadlines, how have you resolved conflict, those kind of big themes that people ask. One tactic I would like people to have a look at is how to answer competency-based interview questions. So a competency-based interview question is when an interviewer will ask you, can you give me an example of where you've led a team? Or can you give me an example where you've worked as a team towards a specific goal, or you've resolved conflict? And the way to answer that is to use this STAR method. This is as old as the hills, but it's really, really valuable, and it's helped a lot of people. So if you can't watch this over and again, I can send people things, but Google it, it is out there. And STAR stands for situation, task, action, and result. So if I was asked for, have I had an experience of leading a small team? Say I wasn't a lead, but they want to know if I had any leadership potential. They might ask me that, excuse me. And I could say, well, I'm an artist. I was asked to get together several assets so that we could send them to an outsourced company, benchmark assets, and I was in charge of, say, a group of 4 people, and we needed, an environment asset, character asset, something else, and maybe a vehicle or something else. That's the situation. The task is I had to get these assets to this outsourced company within 2-week deadline. So the action I took was I made sure that everybody had an individual task. I broke that down into character artist had a character to do, and so on and so forth. I gave them a clear deadline. I gave them the source material so that they knew exactly what to do, and made the expectations really clear, told them what format to send it to me in and by when. And then over the 2-week period, I made sure that I checked in with them periodically to make sure they were to track and that the assets were to a decent level. The result was we got all the assets over to the outsource company. They were absolutely exactly what they needed. And as a result, we worked with that outsource company for 2 years for a full project. So they've asked you a question. You've broken it down to structure, situation, task, action, result. You've shown what you've done. So you don't talk about what we did. You talk about what I did. I did this. I set up this spreadsheet. I set expectations. I managed the team. So that's how you answer a competency-based interview question. So how to prepare for that? Well, first of all, just keep that STAR sort of structure in mind, but try and think of anything that you've been involved with that isn't just business as usual. So have you been assigned a special project? Was there a massive problem when the game was launched that you were assigned to fix? Was there something that was you're particularly proud of? Try and break that down into that STAR structure. Try and see if that will fit into that STAR structure, and I bet it will. So you can't control what they're going to ask you. They're probably going to ask you about things like teamwork, conflict resolution, etc. But how you answer, you can control, and you can fit most of your work anecdotes that you're proud of into that STAR structure, and that's super, super helpful. So we've gone over looking at the games, looking at the studio, looking at the people.
Well, we'll say to go on there, looking at the games and looking at one of the things that's most important to me when I do interviews. I work for GamesIndustry.biz. It's a very specific niche of games media, right? And so a lot of people who apply for jobs at us they're just looking to, they want to review games, right? They want to be in the games generally. And that's no problem, right? If that's where you want to go, that's absolutely fine. And I have no issue with that. But it does mean that we get a lot of people who apply that have no idea who we are. And they have, and that's really, I want to know the two most important things for me. Can you do the job? And that's where things like portfolio and competencies and stuff come into it. Do you want the job? And I really want that to come across. And if you haven't read the website, right? If you haven't, if I ask you, what do you think we're about? And you give an answer which is basically describing Eurogamer or something. I'm that's a big issue for me. That's a big flag for me in terms of me, feeling that you might hire. I say that I have hired someone in the past who I wasn't entirely sure wanted the job that much and turned out to be an astonishing employee. So I know it's not always the best. It's not always the best way, but it is important.
It goes into that sort of compounds into the rest of your opinion of that person, doesn't it? And I think that comes down to a mindset and confidence thing that we discussed before. There's a lot of practical steps. Do your research, find out who they are, but maybe they just didn't have the confidence to tell you that they wanted the job. And some people don't want to say that because they don't know why, or they don't. So I would say you're absolutely right. If you want that job, and interviewers, they're just as nervous as the interviewees sometimes. So people like to be told that they've done well. So reverse it back to them and say to them, I really enjoyed this interview, and for what it's worth, I would love this job. Why? This is the important thing. Don't just leave it there. I would love this job. I think I can add real value. What you described to me about this project really resonates with me because we had a similar situation on XYZ, or I faced a similar challenge at ABC Studio. So definitely say, I want this job. You don't want to say, don't beg for it. You don't want to seem like that, but I definitely say, feel confident and say, look, I think this is a good fit. I really can see how I can add value. And I think that's really important because you're absolutely right. Sometimes they want the confidence that you want the job. They don't know how the interview's gone either. So it comes down to that mindset of when you're going into interview, and most people that I deal with, I tend to deal with slightly more experienced people than not. They know all the answers to these questions. They're not going to ask you anything probably that you don't know. But if they do, we'll come to that. But generally, you've got the answers inside your head. And what stops you getting those answers out is a lack of confidence in your own knowledge, your own skills, and your own worth. So make sure that the first and foremost building foundation to any interview is go into it as confident as you possibly can by whatever tactic, whether you go mental in the toilet or whether you have a bit of aftershave on. Just make sure that you've got that confidence going into it. Prepare your answers, think about your achievements and any projects or anything that you're particularly proud of. Think of that STAR structure and tell them that you're interested in this job. The other thing that I want to touch on is them asking you a question you don't know. Instantly say you don't know. So one of the worst bits of feedback we get is, they were great, but they waffled on this question and we don't think they knew the answer. And people, being asked a question that you don't know isn't the end of the world, but how you handle it can be. So I would say the best thing to do is to say, I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, but my gut feel is telling me that it would be ABC or this way, or I don't know. But what I would do to find out is I would speak to this person. I need this information, or I'd need this tool or this technology to help me do that. That's my sort of educated guess. But ultimately, I don't know the answer to that question. That is a much better answer than waffling, getting nervous, tripping over your own words. If you don't know something, just say it. The other thing that you can prepare is your own questions to ask them. And I think a lot of people kind of go into when they've had a great interview, they come to the end and the interviewer says, "Have you got any questions?" And they go, and a lot of the time, a lot of questions you prepare, the interviewer would have answered inadvertently during their sort of spiel about the studio, about the game, or about the role. So a good way to get around that is ask sort of a bit of a universal question: is, if I was to be offered this role, what would be my biggest challenge when I start? And that's great because it's a great question because first of all, you're getting them to think about you in the job. So you're planting that seed of you in the job. And really what you're asking there is, what are your reservations about me? What experience don't you think I have that might trip me up in this job? And they might say, it's learning this new in-house engine that we've got. It's quite difficult. It's a bit clunky. We're not too sure. It's about, you've not used anything like that before. If they say that, it's a great way for you to say, I appreciate that. That sounds tricky. Last time I learned a new technology was in this studio, and it's quite different, quite a new art package. We didn't know really what it did, but to use it, what I did was I went on forums, I went on Discord, I looked for YouTube tutorials. So you can instantly find out what the challenges are going to be for your own self. If you do take the job, you've got to know that. Find out also what they think you're lacking, and then you're able to then in turn address that. And a good interview is led by good questioning, not just from the interviewer, but from the interviewee. So ask that question: if I was to be offered this role, what would be my biggest challenge? The other question you can ask is, if I was to be offered this role, if I was to start this role, how would you know that I've been a success in this job in, say, 6 to 9 months? And really what you're asking there is, what do you expect of me in 6 to 9 months? And that's good for your own knowledge, because if they say, we need 1,000 characters within 6 months, you're gonna be like, okay, that expectations seem a bit different here. But they might say, well, really what we want to do is build out this character portfolio. We want to go to market in X, Y, and Z. And, the timeline sounds pretty reasonable. Again, it gives you another opportunity to say, great, from based on what you've told me, I feel like that cadence of work suits me. And it actually kind of reminds me of the volume of work or the type of work we were doing at my previous studio. So again, it allows you another chance to iterate why your experience is so valuable. So prepare those 2 questions. A lot of people do ask, have you got any reservations about me? You're kind of covering that in what would be my biggest challenges. I think it's a nicer way to put that. But try to steer away from any contract questions, anything that can result in kind of a binary answer of yes or no, or a number. Try not to ask how many holidays you get, or what the salary is, or what the hours are. There's opportunity. You should already know kind of what the salary roughly is from previous interviews or email conversation. But really, those answers, they're important, but they're static, they're binary. You're going to find out them anyway. The only time that's appropriate to ask that is if sometimes there might be a HR stage to the interview, or a HR person present who may specifically say, have you got any questions around the contract? So yeah, you can ask them there, but generally speaking, with the hiring manager, ask those kind of questions and ask them about themselves as well. A good question to ask is, I've done my research. It looks like a great place to work. This project looks great. Can you speak to the culture in the studio day to day? What does it feel like to work there? Why do you like working there? And you'd have to be a bit confident, I think, to ask that. It's quite a direct question, but I like it, and I ask that to every client I work with. When I'm trying to pitch a job to a candidate, I say to my client, why would someone want this job? If someone's in a job already, or they've got a myriad of options, why would they choose this one? What's in it for them? And yeah, I think that's a really good question to ask. So, and it allows you to finish the interview on a positive note. It allows them to sort of, kind of brag a little bit. They like talking about themselves, or they like talking about the studio. They're proud of their project. So it's a nice way to finish off the interview. So prepare those 3 questions. do your research, find out who you're talking to, do whatever it takes to get in that right mindset. Make sure that your interview admin is top notch around knowing where to park, knowing where to go, or making sure your room and your headset's all well. So yeah, they're sort of the main sort of points.
The interview admin. I want to tell you a story. It would be shameful for somebody if he didn't get the job, but he did get the job. So I'm happy. I don't think he'll mind me revealing it. So James Batchelor, who is the editor in chief of GamesIndustry.biz, when he first came to work for me, which is when we worked on MCV, very long time ago now. We've been working together a very long time. He turned up a week early for his job.
I think you told me this. Yeah.
So
that's actually a really good point. Actually, yeah.
Check the date.
Yeah.
He
Time
got the
zones
day
as well.
right. Yeah. But he turned up to the and to be fair, it was a massive alarm bell. Right. It was like, it's a journalism about attention to detail and all this kind of thing. He aced the interview and he's obviously gone on to be very successful. But it was a very so it's a very bad example of getting the job. He was definitely keen.
I would try and spin that and say, once the job's so much, he's willing to, come a week early to show you. He always exceeds expectation, but that's the recruiter in me. But that is an incredibly well put point. Actually, is help yourself. Make sure you know when it is, where it is. Make sure if you're using something other than Teams or Zoom that you've not used before, make sure you're aware of the software. Make sure you can, it's just that little bit of like stepping stones. Is there anything in the way of you reaching your goal of having a successful interview? And take those little things away. If
you've got dodgy Wi-Fi, find a cable to plug into the router.
Exactly.
It's all stuff. Yeah.
I'll give you some really horror stories that I've had experience of all this. I've had the worst one. I think was this guy I was really excited to speak to, really niche sort of technical skill set, and I know that I'm an agency recruiter, so maybe he just didn't see it as like as prepared for as an interview with the studio. But he was holding his phone below him and vaping whilst talking to me. Sort of outside in like the smoking shed of the studio or something, and it was really. And so the camera was pointing up at his nose, and it was vaping. I was just like, "This is not cool." So yeah, it just I've had that. I've had just chaos in the background, like total chaos. And look, cats come in, kids come in. That isn't the end of the world. It really isn't. It doesn't affect interviews whatsoever. It's when you set the interview up in a cat cafe or with the kids in the same room, that can be really difficult. Try and help yourself have the best interview possible. And I think even then, to be fair, I spent about 25 minutes before a BBC radio appearance a couple of weeks back, setting everything up to make sure nothing went wrong. And within 1 minute, my internet failed, and I was live on the BBC radio, and I disappeared. I did come back very quickly, but sometimes things just go wrong. And you've just got to roll with it. And try not let it drag you down. That's absolutely right. Yeah. Do as much as you can. If there's anything out of your control, you can't control it, so just forget about it. Prepare those questions. Go in with the right mindset of it's a peer level, eye-to-eye conversation. Yes, you have to sell yourself, but they should have to sell themselves to you as well. You're choosing to spend 8 hours a day doing work for them, so it's up to them to sell yourself. So that's what I would say broadly covers sort of interview prep. It's very subjective, it's very personal, it's very specific to interviews as well. Often there's technical tests, there's second stage, third stage interviews, there's panel interviews. There's a lot of different things that you can do, but broadly speaking, all of those tips should help with each stage. The one thing I would say, just to caveat, is with second stage interviews, a lot of prep gets given for the first stage, and you do a lot of prep for the first stage, and then second stage it's kind of like, yeah, no worries, I'll make it, I'll be there. What I would say is just think like Netflix with your interviews. Try and connect them. When you've watched a program, an episode, you watch the next one, it's like previously on. So try and think about that when you're going to your next interview. Try and recap what was said in the first stage. What did you say to that person that really resonated with them? You can tell from their body language, can't you, that you've said something, they're like, yeah, no, that's totally bang on. Or what did you learn in that interview that you didn't know beforehand? Try and have that front of mind. Go over your research, go over the job spec again, find out who you're speaking to in the second stage and what's their angle. Are they a peer within the studio structure? Would you be reporting into them, or would they be reporting to you? And how does that change the dynamic? So pay as much attention to those second stage interviews as you do your first. Try and link them. And you can even go a step further and mention your first stage interview in the second. So you may say, Chris, great to see you. You know, when I spoke to James last week in my first stage, he mentioned this was coming up. Hope the event went well. Did you meet that deadline? I don't know. How did the article go? And it's just a good way of saying, hey, this is important to me. I paid attention, and I'm letting you know that I'm in your world. So second stage interview advice is follow the first stage, but try and link them and try and make that tangible link to one another.
My nightmare of interviews is always a question where I know I should have a good answer to this question, and I don't, and not because I don't know the answer, but because I'm worried of if I say it like what's your salary expectations or something like that. That's always I haven't had many interviews in my career. I think this is hopefully something that a lot of people I suspect watching this haven't, and that's always the one that makes me most anxious, because I will end up grasping around for an answer that in my brain that I've not
it's a tricky one. I think try before you go in, try and identify any areas that it might cause you that reaction, and salary is the most obvious one. The other ones might be any gaps in your CV that you might ask for, or say you've left a job after 3 months and it wasn't a great leaving. Say you fell out with someone, or say it just wasn't a culture fit, or something bad happened that you don't necessarily want to specifically go into depth about, because you don't want to. The last thing you want to do in an interview is curse your last employer, or any individual really. So think about those areas and you think, if I get asked about this, what reaction will it cause? And try and have a pre-planned answer. So on the salary answer, hopefully you should know roughly what this role is paying. You should know roughly a bandwidth, or you should have spoken to a recruiter or someone, or it should have been on the advert ideally. It always is on mine, and I always give that prep to candidates. So what I would say is try not to be defensive about it. I appreciate people want to get the best deal possible, but what I would say to that is, well, I understand the bracket for this role is say 60 to 65,000. Ideally, I'd like the upper end of that. I was on slightly lower previously, but I know that I was due a pay rise in this fiscal year. So try to take it away from the individual. So try not to talk about, I want you to pay me this. Try and reference the studio. So, I was hoping that the studio would be able to pay me around 65,000, but I am negotiable. I'm open to offers. I don't know the full benefits package. I think try and give a confident answer that kind of gives them an idea, but leaves it open for negotiation. If you just go in there and say, make me an offer, it just looks a bit defensive. It just doesn't look great. I think I kind of get it. I understand that they should, make their first move in a negotiation type thing, but I do think to give a broad spectrum. Otherwise, look, if your expectations and their budgets are totally out, may as well find out now anyway. There's nothing really to lose. So, and don't always base it on your previous salary. If you were underpaid, or you feel that you've not had a pay rise for a while, acknowledge that and say, well, my previous salary was a little bit lower than this, but I know that I missed out. I've spoken to some peers in the industry, and really what I'd be aiming for is around sort of 60, 65. A great way to get hold of an idea of the salary you should be looking for is speak to a recruiter. I have an up-to-date salary benchmark here on my computer that I'm happy to share with anyone. And there's some outliers. Some studios pay a lot more. Some startups might pay a lot less, but give you equity. I think salary is one part of an offer. So give an idea, but keep it open. Say, I'd ideally like this, but I'm open. It would depend on the rest of the benefits.
Well, we will. I guess we'll come on to salary negotiation in our next video. And it's interesting. Hopefully actually one of my worst experience of an interview was the interview itself went very, very well, but I applied for a job in the games media. I got an interview at an unofficial Xbox magazine in Bournemouth, which is a long way from where I live. Bournemouth's not the cheapest place in the country to live either. It isn't the most expensive, but I travelled down there with an idea in my head of what I could accept, and it was a very low salary. Like, I wanted the job, and I was willing to go for a very low salary, but they would not tell me over the phone. They wouldn't give me any information on what the salary range was. Nothing. So I travelled all the way down to Bournemouth for a long time to get there, and within 10 minutes of the interview they told me what the salary was, and I immediately knew I could not afford to move on that salary. And
waste of time.
And I had a great interview, and I was really sad in the end when they invited me back for a second interview. I just went, there's just no point. So hopefully,
that's why our job adverts should have a salary on. And if a recruiter approaches you about a job, when I approach someone about a job, I always put the salary on an email. I hope any listeners here can attest to that. I give as much detail as possible. But I would say that the salary is one aspect of an offer. There's really good offers, and also I think there's there's a bit of a trend at the moment. I'm seeing fully remote roles are paying slightly less because there's not, a commuting cost incurred and things like that. So I think look at the context of the role, look at what else they're offering. A big established AAA company will probably, by and large, be able to offer you more stable bonuses, things like benefits, private health, pension, and so on and so forth, which can amount to thousands. Whereas a startup, their main benefit to you might be that sort of 4-year buyout of some shares that could be paying off your mortgage, but the benefits are basic. So, yeah, I think try to have an idea of what you're worth and what in terms of the market and what you can afford. But yeah, and ideally try and share that beforehand. And definitely, if there's no mention of a salary going to interview, I think really try and push for that that information from somewhere.
Okay. Well, I'm going to stop this session. Well, we could talk. I think we could talk about this for
it's a big
hours.
Subject. Yeah.
But so thank you, Alan. Thanks so much for that.
You're welcome.
Please do check our first video in this series on what to do when you've been made redundant, which offers job hunting advice on how to apply. You can check that link in the description. Also, come back for our third video where we'll be discussing what to do after a job interview, and we'll cover things like salary negotiations, which we've been talking about a little bit here. And again, links to both those videos in the description. Also, a link in the description is Alan's LinkedIn profile. So if you want to ask any questions specific maybe to your situation that these videos haven't covered, I'm sure Alan would be perfectly happy to give you some advice. And of course, if you want to keep up to date on all the goings on in the games business, do subscribe to the GamesIndustry.biz newsletter. But until next time, until our next video, thank you for watching.